what I want to show you is what happens in a slot machine in the program when the program is a video slot machine and is using what international gaming technology is called. By the way, this is how to get the safer players at that web address. And it's called virtual real technology. And if you go on Google and you type virtual real technology, you will find a lawsuit by International Gaming Technologies against another slot machine company and telling it that that slot machine company was stealing International Gaming Technologies' virtual real technology idea. It's actually used by all slot machine manufacturers. It works by using the principle of mapping. Remember, we had the 10-sided dice and the 6-sided dice. Here, what we have is a 32 slot, 32 space slot reel versus a 22 space. What we see on the machine are 22 possible spaces and symbols. But what is actually inside the program are 32 spaces. So instead of dividing by 22, when the random number comes out, it divides by 32. And it uses this reel to map it with what we see on the screen. Now that 1 is mapped to the 7, right? The 2 is mapped to the 7, right? You follow that? The 3 is mapped to the 7. What will the 4 be mapped to? We don't know. In fact, it's mapped to a bar. Huh. That's interesting. That 7 is not mapped at all. It cannot appear on the pay line. Impossible. And that is perfectly legal. That 7 can never appear on the pay line. That is, says none right here. It says it in red. Okay? So that's mapped to that bar. The 5 is mapped to that bar. The 6 is mapped to that bar. You'd expect the 7 to be mapped to a cherry, but it's not. It's also mapped to that bar. The 8 is mapped to the cherry. The 9 is mapped to that cherry. The 10 is mapped to a blank. And in fact, all the others are mapped to blanks. That's mapped. That's not. That's mapped to, it looks like it's mapped to 4 spaces. That's not mapped. That's mapped to 4 spaces. That's mapped to 1 space, mapped to 2, not mapped at all, mapped to 3 spaces, mapped to 1, mapped to 7 spaces, mapped to 1, mapped to 2 spaces, mapped to 1, not mapped at all, mapped to 1, not mapped, mapped to 1, not mapped, mapped to 1, not mapped, mapped to 2. Now we put it all together. The random number generator is going around and around and around and around. Well, actually, pixels are changing color. Okay? And when I hit this button, the first thing that will happen that this will generate a number, between 1 and 2 million. And that will then be divided by 32. 1 added to get a number between 1 and 32. Okay. Then the third thing is it will map it. And then a movie will be shown. A DVD movie. Already programmed into the slot machine. This slot machine has 15 movies, but there are only 22 spots. Because there are 7 spots that are not mapped. They can't be in a movie. You can't have the 7 under the wind line movie. It's not a possible movie to show. So let's play the game here. Happened the 29 got mapped to the 2, and then the 12 movie was shown. '23 was mapped to the 14. The 14 movie was shown. The 3 was mapped to the 7. The 7 movie was shown. The 1 movie was shown. It takes approximately 1/2000th of a second to generate the first random number, right? Or half of a thousandth of a second, 1/2000th of a second to generate one number. But then it takes maybe another 2 or 3,000th of a second to divide by 32. It takes another maybe 10/2000th of a second to map. And then it takes the rest of the time to show the movie. So it looks like the movie is being shown instantly, but our eyes are not fast enough to pick it up. So this program slows the process down. It slows the process down. And the main principle here is what you see is not what you get on a virtual real technology machine. What you see is not what you get. Okay. Review this. You see the safe at play. You see that's what you see. I mean, you see the payouts. There's the mapping and the random number. And I could play it, but you can't see it because it's in red. Second thing, there's mapping, but there's more than one reel being mapped at the same time. Reel 1, Reel 2, Reel 3 are being mapped. There are 3 separate random number generators, one for each reel operating. Right? And each going at the same speed. If there are 3 reels. If there are 5 reels, we have 5 random number generators working. Okay. And for example, in reel number 1, there are 5 7s. In reel number 2, there are 2 7s. In reel number 3, there are 3 7s. In reel number 1, there are 5 bars. In reel number 2, there are 4 bars. In reel number 3, there are 4 bars. In reel number 1, there are 20 cherries, 3 cherries, 2 cherries. We can play around with the payout and the frequency of bet by playing around with this information. This is the example for the first reel. There are 5 7s that are connected to the 5 7s. To 5 7s. Let's look at possible outcomes. On the first reel, there are 32 possible outcomes because we're dividing by 32. We don't have to divide by 32. We can divide by 512 to have 524,000 possible combinations. Remember I did the head. Right? Now instead of head, tail, instead of 1,024 of these, we have 542,288 of them. Each of them is equally possible. computers are virtually limitless. Why not 838? No, in fact, why not 8,388,608 possible combinations? This is only 3 reals. The complexity of this is just mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Because of the red. Okay, good enough. There are let's just look at the sevens. There are 5 sevens in the first reel, 2 sevens in the second, and 3 sevens in the third. That means there are 30 possible ways of getting a 7. Okay? There are 80 possible ways of getting 3 bars, 12 possible ways of getting 3 cherries. There are 476 possible ways of getting 2 cherries, 6,180 ways of getting 1 cherry. So there's 6,778 possible winners out of 32,768 possible combinations. In other words, there are 25,990 that are losers. Approximately 20% of the time, I win something. Okay. When I have 3 sevens, I win $250, 250 kroner. There are 30 ways of winning 250 kroner. That means that the machine will pay out $7,500 for every 32,000 pushes of the button, on average. It'll pay $6,000 kroner when it hits 3 bars. And it'll pay 12,360 kroner for any 1 cherry. Okay? It's paying out 90.98% of the money. This is a 91% machine. We can change these payout rates to make it an 88% machine, like you have. Or we can play around with the pay table. None of this is in red, which is excellent. Okay. Now, notice the sevens. The payout is $7,500. Right? If I increase the number of sevens on the virtual real number 1 and I make it 6 sevens instead of 5, all of a sudden I change it from a 90% machine, a 91% machine, to a 95% machine. Because now, instead of paying out $7,500, I'm paying out $9,000 on the sevens. But I changed nothing. In other words, none of this is all you know. I did not change that at all. So I have 2 machines that look exactly alike. One pays out 91% and the other pays out 95%. The one that pays 95% has 1 more 7 on virtual real 1. Now let's change the cherries. Make it from 2 cherries to 3 cherries. All of a sudden, I have a 99% payback machine by adding 1 cherry. I went from a 90% machine to a 95% machine to a 99% machine. We can also go back to 88%. I could figure out how to do 88% somehow by changing this or changing the payout rate. We're paying out too much, so let's pay out less for 3 bars. Let's pay out $25. Now I have an 86% machine, almost an 87% machine. I play around. That's how they change the payout rate. So we can have 2 machines that look exactly alike. One pays 88% and the other one pays 92%. And you ask and I went into the casino once and I said, well, how do I tell which is an 88% machine and which is a 92% machine? And he says, well, we don't tell you. You don't have the right to know how much money you're going to get back. And in fact, nowhere in the United States do you have the right to know how much money you're getting back from any one machine. But you know it's around 90%, between 88 and 92%. Progression of problem gambling is faster for the video lottery terminals than it is for any other type of gambling. We compared the video lottery terminal. What we did was we looked at patients. Fortunately, this is not a best sample. But there were two studies that Bob Breen did, who was a colleague of mine. The first study had 151 patients, and the second study had 180 patients. And they were seeking treatment at our treatment program. And 153 developed problems through the traditional types of gambling. That included cards, dice, horses, sports. And 176 developed problems through video lotteries. Now the question, how long from the time when they became involved in gambling until full-fledged diagnosed pathological gambling did it take? The results were consistent. Both studies showed the same thing. Machine gambling, it took a little bit over 1 year from playing 4 days a month or more to full-blown problems. It took a little bit over a year. For the other forms of gambling, it took approximately between 3, well, it took longer. And the difference, the machines took a little bit over 1 year. The instant lottery, they're a very small sample, unfortunately, took almost 2.7 years. Then cards, 3.6 years. The racetrack, 5 years. And sports betting, almost 5.5 years. In terms of the progression, it gets shorter and shorter. The period from regular gambling to problematic gambling gets shorter and shorter and shorter as we move from sports and racetrack gambling to the machines. Breen explains this through the speed of the machine, how fast the machine is played. The virtual real mapping that I just described. There's no clocks or cues to stop on the machine. There's visual and sound stimulation. We're playing for credits on the machine. We can convert them into kroner, but we're playing for credits. And he says that this is a gateway form of gambling. He says it's virulent. In other words, very, very, very fast and epidemic-like once it starts. The rest of the handouts have a list of cognitive distortions and thinking errors, which I think you're quite familiar with. And I wanted to point out Gambler's Attitude and Belief Scale, Breen and Zuckerman. And you can get a copy by send an email to rbreen@lifespan.org. And he will send you a copy of that. Great. You already have the Gambler's Belief Questionnaire in your packet. And Julian Tabor's belief about gambling is one of the scales we use. It's not necessarily the best one. Okay. What about money? Gamblers have a distorted view of money. They have a distorted view of money, and they want their financial problems addressed right away. And we have them wait for 30 days because we're afraid of bailouts. And we also warn family members about bailouts. One of the reasons for contacting family members as soon as possible is you want to talk to them about bailouts. It's like giving money to a problem gambler is like giving alcohol to an alcoholic. if they're in need of money, because many of them believe that they have a money problem. We get them to list their creditors and the amounts that they owe. We get them to list their monthly expenses. And using the monthly expenses, let's say that their expenses are, I can only use dollars. Let's say that it's $1,000 a month in expenses. But they have $1,200 in income. That means they have $200 they can use to pay bills. And we start from there. And we say, okay, you have $200 a month you can use to pay bills. You owe a lot of money. So we take the two, we say, okay, person number one, you owe 50% of the money, you pay that person $100 a month. Person number two, you owe 25% of the money, you pay that person $50 a month. Person number three, you owe 10% of the money, you pay that person $20 a month. And person three, who you owe 15%, you pay that person $30 a month. This is when I do financial counseling with the gamblers. I tend not to send them to debt counseling organizations because the debt counseling organizations will often suggest financial problems that will solve their financial difficulties too quickly, and result in a relapsed gambling. We also warn them about unexpected income sources. In the United States, you have the income tax refund time. That's an important time. Also, people get insurance checks, or they get money through insurance payments, or they may inherit money. And if it's a spouse relationship, we tell the spouse, that the spouse needs to know where the gambler's stash is, where the gambler keeps his or her money for gambling money. And does the gambler have a post office box, or that they use for their mail? Okay. The financial planning, we do that only after 1 month. And it has to include debts to friends as well as credit cards, etc. And when they're talking about their expenses, we tell them you have to include entertainment in your expenses. You can't go without entertainment, because if you go without entertainment, you're going to say, what is life worth living for if I'm just paying my debt? They need to be able to go to the movies. They need to have some sort of financial plan. And in some instances, they may need a trustee. This is someone else who is going to take care of their finances for them. If it's a spouse, then the spouse basically becomes a trustee. Relapse prevention, again, we focus in on relapse prevention. We review the triggers, and we emphasize cues to prevent potential relapse, and use those cues to develop treatment. Treatment plans, prevention plans. Example, we try to erect barriers to relapse. How do we erect a barrier to relapse? Let's say I have a good friend who's a gambler, a fellow problem gambler. I tell that gambler that I have a problem and I'm not gambling anymore. I try to erect the barrier between myself and future requests to gamble with me by telling that person I have a gambling problem. Basically, like being a turtle coming out of the shell and telling your friends, I have a gambling problem, I can't gamble. And that actually is a relapse prevention strategy for a lot of gamblers. Some relapse cues. Poor treatment compliance. They still have cognitive style and thinking errors. This is a relapse cue. They haven't made lifestyle changes that they need to make. They keep secrets from their spouse. They have untreated mental illness or untreated alcohol or drug problems. Those are relapse cues that need to be addressed, or else the person will relapse. In our experience, that's enough evidence. There's enough evidence to support that. Okay. We've run out of time, but tomorrow I will talk about the dual diagnosis issues and how I go about treating dual diagnosis clients, and also we'll talk about gambling and criminal behavior now. Because I've done a fair amount of forensic work with gamblers in the United States. So, anybody have any questions? Or is this just the end? Oh, yes.
I have just one question. I was wondering, how is treatment financed?
How is treatment financed? Okay. Most states in the United States do not finance treatment at all. So the only people that can get treatment in those states are people with insurance. Right? 1 out of 6 Americans have no insurance at all. In Rhode Island, $150,000 has been allocated per year to treat gamblers. The Department of Mental Health decided that it was not going to spend all of that money. It was going to use that money for other services. So it spent $85,000, which our treatment facility received. And at our treatment facility, everyone who asks for treatment gets it. We turn no one away. And we will keep them coming in for treatment as long as they want. And if their spouse wants to come in for treatment, the spouse as well. What we really need is a family therapist in our practice, and someone who can actually work with the children of gamblers. But there's not enough funding for that. There's only funding basically for 2 treatment professionals. They don't pay the electric and the light bill. The state does not pay the electric bill. Of the $85,000, $15,000 goes to advertise our program. We put advertisements in the local newspaper. Because the amount of public awareness is not enough, because the state is not spending money on public awareness and prevention programs. So in addition to treating, we have to attract the clients ourselves, and we do that through advertisements in the newspaper. There was another treatment program that was providing treatment. It was an alcohol and drug treatment program. Unfortunately, the 2 of us saw twice as many clients as the 8 therapists in that program. So they saw, for example, 80 people. We saw 150 in 1 year, almost twice as many. And we were turning no one away. And we found out that they were turning people away who were then getting free treatment from us. We never told the state that happened. And now they no longer have any funding. And right now, the organization, I belong to an organization called the Rhode Island Council on Problem Gambling, and we went to the legislators, and in fact I presented this morning's presentation, part of that, to them, to one of the committees, and they reinstated the funding and told the Department of Mental Health it had to spend the funding on gamblers. Because at the time they were thinking of legalizing a new casino. There's a lot of corruption in politics in our state, and that's part of what's going on. Not in terms of allocating treatment money, but in terms of politicians voting for gambling because they think they're going to make some money from the gamblers, from the casino.
May I ask how much is your customer pay for treatment?
They either pay, if they have insurance, they pay the copay, which is $15 a session. If they have no money, they pay nothing.
In the case they are quite well-doing people with insurance, what about?
They pay $15 and they pay their insurance company. Right. And if they have no insurance, they pay $105 a session for the individual and $15 a session for the group, because we subsidize the group with the state money. But 1/3 of the people I see have no insurance at all. Another third, they pay $15 because and their insurance runs out, and they continue to pay $15. So if they have managed care and they only have 12 sessions, when the 12 sessions are over, we continue seeing them. But that's the way we run our treatment program.
Do you have a helpline in Rhode Island?
Yes, there is a helpline that is operated by an organization called Crossroads, which also has about 20 other helplines. And so the gambling helpline is not a separate helpline. And that is funded through the lottery. The lottery pays that helpline. Yes?
Do you treat adolescents as well, or only adults?
Only adults, because we're an adult outpatient treatment facility. That's where we're located. And in the last 3 years, actually, the youngest person I've seen has been 18 years old. Most of the people I see are in their 40s and 50s, 40 years old, 50 years old. And I've seen them, the oldest was 85. Youngsters don't come in for treatment. They don't call the helpline either. It would be the parents might call, and then we bring the parents in, and we throw up our hands and say, we are in an adult treatment program. We can't take juveniles. We can't take adolescents. And there are very few people. There are some people who will take it with insurance, treat adolescents with insurance. It's not gambling is illegal under 18. But that doesn't mean that 17 and 16-year-olds don't gamble, because they do. So in a sense, are you treating adolescents? Anyone here? Anyone here treating adolescents? You're treating adolescents? Okay, so you are treating them. But the machines are also available in all the grocery stores. Right. What will happen when the machines are available only in, there's going to be just liquor bars and pubs? Some kids will gamble, but my guess is that the number of kids who gamble will drop once the grocery stores are out of business.